Welcome to the Ledger and the Leader here at BBH CSD. I'm Superintendent Jeff Harrison.
And I'm Treasurer Craig Yanagloss. This is where transparency meets teamwork.
We're giving you a front row seat to the decisions, dollars, and directions that help shape your school district.
No fluff, just real conversations straight from your district leadership.
Well, Craig, here we are, episode number 5. I know I keep counting them. I wonder if we get to episode like 125, if I'll keep saying it that way. But, it's been exciting. They're rolling around quicker and quicker. I'm being contacted by people in our district to want to be guests. I think our next round, I think we have some students from the high school that are going to join us.
Nice.
Partake in a pretty special initiative fundraiser that they'd like to get some awareness about. So maybe that's a little bit of a cliffhanger for upcoming episodes. But today's episode, we're going to dig into a little bit about does BBH CSD have a bullying problem?
Absolutely not. Can't be.
Right, because no matter what school district you're in, no matter what Facebook page you read or Facebook group you're part of, you always hear about bullying. And my son or daughter is being bullied. And I want to first put out the disclaimer. We're not saying that there isn't issues, conflicts, and concerns with students and relationships. But when we throw the word bullying, harassment, intimidation around in our circles, that means a whole different thing than what people think. And it's always interesting to hear people say the school never does anything about it. Well, we're going to bring some people in today, some special guests, some pretty special individuals who are the boots on the ground. They're the ones that when they get that call from the parent or that student stops in the office or we get a report of bullying, harassment, intimidation, they're going to explain to us what the school does do because I think a lot of people don't understand all the things that go on behind the scenes. So that's later in the episode. But before we get there, we had a great opportunity last week to go down to OSBA down in Columbus. So maybe share with the listeners what OSBA is and where we were last week.
Sure. So the Ohio School Boards Association, which our board belongs to, so we pay a membership fee for them to, help us stay on top of legislative items and whatnot. So they put on this huge conference every year. We take over downtown Columbus. Pretty much almost every school attends.
All 607 school districts, right?
Correct. Not all of them, I'm sure. There's probably a few outliers that don't go, but most people do go down for that event. It's at the Greater Convention Center in Columbus, and you get superintendents, treasurers, Board of Education members, sometimes directors, and other administrators go down to these conferences. It's a huge event. Lots of professional development goes on, lots of networking opportunities. And so our board has notoriously always been going, which is good for their professional development. And we got to take our newest elected board member.
Which is always a little bit awkward, right? I mean, I've been superintendent for 6 years. And every year we go to OSBA, if we have a board election, we kind of have to poll the candidates and saying, if you're elected, would you like to go? Because we've always taken those new board members, or at least made the opportunity available. And in this instance, Ellen Kramer, who's the board member who's rolling off, who is no longer going to be on the board by her choosing, she chose to stay home. And it opened up a spot for Mr. Brad Chase, who's our new board member.
He is. And so it's a good point, because normally this year's conference was about a week later, which for the treasurers who typically try to coordinate a lot of the rooms and how you get all the registration stuff taken care of can be challenging, because a lot of times the board election happens on a Tuesday and we're leaving on Sunday. So we at least had a little bit of buffer this year, which was much appreciated, because it's a really tight turnaround to make swapping out reservations and whatnot, even though that still happened. I always complain because I probably get about 10 emails a day for that entire week of people like, I need a room here, I need a room there, I need a room here. Do you have space at this hotel? And it's mind-boggling, all of the crazy emails that we have to deal with just to coordinate hotel
on a
reservations.
personal note, I totally appreciated being a week later, because when it was the second week of November, my wife's birthday always would fall in there. And that would always be difficult going out of town for work while on my wife's birthday. So I want to send a special thank you to OSBA for pushing it back a week.
I'm sure that's
hopefully
why they
it stays
did.
there, but I'm sure that's not the reason, and we'll just have to deal with that moving forward. But as I mentioned, Mr. Brad Chase did win the election, as well as Tish Kwiatkowski got reelected. She was the incumbent. We had 2 seats that were up. She was the incumbent, she was the leading vote getter, and then Brad Chase was number 2 of the 4 candidates total that ran for Board of Education. So we're looking forward to Brad joining the board. He's not a new face to our district. He's been actively involved for many years, has been on the Campus Master Planning Committee. I think he has also served on the Facilities Steering Committee years ago. So it's not new. He's also on the foundation, matter of fact.
Yeah.
So we welcome him and congratulate him and Tish for being reelected.
And I think that, when you look at as you mentioned earlier, new board members, like it is really like when we do the OSBA trainings, which sometimes they'll do to come in and do retreats with boards, it's like it really is developing the team atmosphere of getting, 5 board members, treasurer and superintendent, because we are the only 2 that the board directly hires or fires. This was a great opportunity to get to know Brad as a newer member, even though the other members were already there. Also for them to get to know him on a little bit deeper level as well, just to, go to some of the same workshops together and, bounce ideas off of each other was, I think it's always good to start to build that team together when you have new people joining.
Yeah, because they're the pulse of our community. And each one of those 5 obviously have different social circles they interact with, and they bring that feedback to us, the administrative team here in the district, to help lead the district making decisions on where resources be allocated. So it's always good to get that time alone with them, distraction-free, to be able to build those relationships.
Yeah.
However, it wouldn't be another podcast if we didn't talk about school finance update. So how about you share with us some of the doom and gloom, positive, forward-facing things that are going on in Columbus?
Well, I actually had a busy day today, so I've already sent out some veto requests to our governor because it's been a very busy legislative season for the legislators who are trying to rapidly put Band-Aids onto the short-term, what they believe are fixes, which I disagree with. So right now there's actually 4 bills that have made it to the governor's desk. They're waiting for his signature, which I kind of hope he vetoes all of them, to be quite honest.
So get your pencils out and your papers so you can write this information down.
Yes. So I have the cheat sheet in front of me. So House Bill 129. Okay. You have to remember that is called the bait and switch.
Bait and switch.
It's the bait and switch.
I haven't read that in social media yet.
Well, I've mentioned before that we can use AI for some really great things. Okay. And so this is a nice, easy way to hopefully explain it to some of our listeners out there, but it changes the rules for school levies after you've already voted for them, which is why it's the bait and switch.
So I put a levy as a superintendent, Board of Education. We put a levy on the ballot to our community. And when we put that levy on the ballot, we have to be crystal clear as to what it's for, how much it's going to be, and what type of levy it is. So we already do that. So what are they doing to that?
Well, it's the lay explanation of it is like if you think about your mortgage. So you have this mortgage contract, but 3 years later the bank decides, you know what, we're going to change the terms, but we're not going to really ask you about it. So that's what's happening. The bill, what it does to school funding is it alters the financial agreement between the voters and the district for the levy's lifespan. So they have that ability to do that bait and switch in House Bill 129.
And why might they do that? What would the need be for that?
Well, it allows some arbitrary ways that they can change the amount of money that would be brought in. And that's really the concern that a lot of school districts are facing. And so that's why they want to protect the revenue sources and the revenue base for school districts, because we always go back to local control, which a lot of these still, basically undermine local control, is that boards, as you just mentioned, have they're the community's pulse. So they have all of these things in terms of how they're reading the community. And then all of a sudden now the legislature is going to come in and they're trying to put this Band-Aid onto this long-term problem, which we still have not solved for over 30 years at this point.
Right. Okay, so bait and switch. That's number 1.
House
Bill 129.
Number 2 is House Bill 186, which is the zip code lottery.
All right.
So what it does is it makes tax rates depend on when a county does its paperwork rather than on the actual value of your home, because the Constitution has ingrained in it that taxes should be fair and uniform. But the bill creates a very messy system where you have 2 identical houses that could pay wildly different tax rates just because they're in different counties. Okay. So that creates a huge problem on different schedules, and it makes the tax bills very unpredictable and unfair, because that was the whole purpose of why they put property taxes out, and that it's distributed in a uniform manner. And now you could have different counties operating differently, even though those houses could be completely comparable, which is why there are actual constitutional issues that arise out of House Bill 186. So it depends on where your zip code is based on how your property taxes may be calculated.
So Medina County for me, I think Summit County for you, Cuyahoga County where our school district is. So you're telling me if you and I had identical homes, I'm in Medina County, you're in Summit County, that they could be factored in differently as far as what I pay in property taxes?
That is correct. And while we talk about our district of where we work at BBH, we're in Cuyahoga County, but it doesn't mean that it's not subject to some of those things. So some of these don't directly or may not directly affect us now, but they could also affect us in the future. But there are other counties that are already starting to put in some provisions in other areas of legislative law that are really pitting people against each other. So there's been hearings already out in Geauga County to look at the piggyback and all other provisions that were a part of House Bill 96. And it's really changing the game. And so school districts are having a much harder time planning for their resources.
Right, and that's where I think I hear some of our professional organizations talk, and they'll say, we all need to take our Letterman's coat off. And what they mean by that is, yes, you and I, number one priority is BBH CSD. And we will fight and claw and to do what's best for our district. But we're also public educators, and we need to be watching out for public education in general. And I think BBH, the way we have done things in the past with continuing levies, not being on the 20 mil floor, things like that, we're kind of staying out of the fray right now. But it doesn't mean it's not coming for us. And some of these bills are going to affect us. So I didn't mean to take us off track there, but I think that's one thing we have to remember is, yes, maybe BBH isn't overly affected by one of these bills yet, but we also need to be looking out for public education as a whole.
Yeah, it's definitely a combination, and it's one of the reasons why we try to take action, because we're still all in this together, and it's still supposed to be the uniform system for how we educate kids in our state. So the things we can do, hopefully they will have an impact, and that's why our organizations we work with are also urging vetoes in some of these with these bills that are currently coming out, because again, we've all been saying we just want you to take a step back and actually look at the full problem and address the problem.
Right.
Which ultimately is that the state should be paying more of its fair share.
Right. And we could trace all this back to 20 to 30 years ago with House Bill 920, right? And legislation that was put in place, which at the time was good and had a purpose, but we've just continued to build on that legislation, trying to repair some of the unintended consequences. And it just gets messier and messier. So didn't mean to take you off. So that's two. No. What's number three?
Number three is House Bill 335, which is the budget blindfold. So it ties school funding minimums to inflation and administrative timing, making the revenue unpredictable. So as you know, we have to put those 5-year forecasts together. Well, three-year forecasts, but we're still planning for 5.
Right, because how can we negotiate with a 3-year forecast?
Right. So just like a family needs to know their salary to budget for a mortgage and groceries, a school district needs predictable revenue to hire teachers and keep the lights on. And this bill does create a moving target for funding, make it nearly impossible for us to plan responsibly for the future. Okay. So these are the things that just make the budgeting process so much more difficult, that they're trying to weave in, that's supposed to give taxpayers this relief. But the problem is that there's not a ton of tax relief given in these bills, and it's varied throughout the state. So some will see more relief than others. It's like you were just talking about also with 920. 920 is affecting those districts that were on the floor. So they saw these one-time revenue increases, and that's what they're trying to to curb against, is like, well, they saw these fluctuations. Well, now those schools don't have to ask for more money either.
Correct.
So that changes, they shouldn't be, I guess, if they're operating their district, their superintendent, treasurer, and board are all on the same page, they shouldn't have to, because they did get a windfall. Yep. So these property reappraisals did take some of those districts by surprise a little bit. But
and I guess that's a frustration for me as I talk to friends and colleagues that maybe don't know this topic as well. They're like, well, I'm reading these headlines. It's going to save billions or millions and billions of dollars. How could this not be good, Jeff? And I'm like, the problem is we're just going to have to come to you as a school district, to your local community, and say, listen, the state has made legislative changes that has reduced our funding. We have to come to you now, local John taxpayer, and ask you for additional funding to run our school district. And in our community, Brecksville Broadview Heights, there's a certain standard that our community expects from their school district. And if the state is going to reduce some of those mechanisms that provide a stable funding for us, we only have the option of going back to our local community and putting a ballot that's transparent and clear, a ballot issue, transparent and clear, for them to either vote yes or to vote no. And that's the thing, is they want to continue to tell us about, it's all about local control, but then they want to take it away from us at times too.
Right. Well, and I don't know how you will eventually maybe unwind some of these Band-Aids, as I call them, because if you actually get to the root of this, it does still go back to some of these structural fundamental problems that we have with how we fund schools in Ohio. One of the things that was just shared with me this morning was, and maybe we'll link it, I guess, but it's a video from Senator Blessings, who's out of Cincinnati, Republican out of Cincinnati. And while it wasn't like a derailment of some of these bills, it really says the same thing. These are short-term Band-Aids that are not solving the problem. The fact remains is that when you adjust for inflation especially, we are funding our schools less than what we did in 1997.
And when we say we're funding, we mean the state is funding less.
Correct. And so what has happened is, do you know what else happened in 1997 too, right? It was the first which program?
Well, I was a sophomore in college, so I'm not sure.
Okay, well, I was like a sophomore in high school.
Okay.
But that was the first voucher program.
Oh, yes, the magical vouchers.
The magical voucher
for Cleveland
system.
Metropolitan Schools, which were
Correct.
meant to take kids from failing schools and give them opportunity to go to a better school district, which I
Correct.
don't think you'd find anybody in the state of Ohio that would argue with the idea of taking students from failing school districts and giving them opportunity to go to a better performing district. I don't think anybody questions that logic.
Nope.
But that's not how vouchers are used.
Not today.
Matter of fact, I'm not going to, no names, all right? But there is a school of choice relatively close to us that has over 800 voucher students within their building. Only one of those 800 voucher students is the original ed choice, meaning a student going from a failing school district to a higher performing school. All 799 other students are ed choice expansion, which Elon Musk, if he lived in the state of Ohio, would qualify for an ed choice expansion, as well as his buddy Jeff Bezos.
Yep.
It's all based on income. Now, they would only get $600, okay?
Correct.
Not the $8,000, the total number. But so that's the problem, was that voucher program, when it started, had great rationale behind it, but it's turned into something much more.
Correct.
Some call it just a tax break for the wealthy.
Well, and the one thing that was, I appreciate Senator Blessing actually calling a spade, which is that we are, I think it was 35th, or I think it's 37th. We're 37th in state funding, and we are so far behind all of our peer states around us, including West Virginia. We fund at the state level lower than all of the surrounding states around us. And when you factor, but what's interesting is when you factor in the local share, we're right in the middle of the country. We're 25th, which means our local community is stepping up to fill those gaps, and they're feeling the pressure, which is why they're so upset at property taxes.
And why we're having all this legislation trying to cure it. Because when the state shirks their responsibility to fund public schools as it is in the Constitution, it then falls to our local community members who have a certain expectation for their public school within their school district. And we're fortunate to live in a district that has supported our school district and continues to support us, and we're thankful for that. But that doesn't mean it's equitable, doesn't mean it's fair, doesn't mean it's being done the right way. And I'm not saying I have all the answers either. I don't want to say that. And I've said every time we talk about these things, these legislators have a hard job to do. And really, I think some of it might be reactionary because of the fear of property taxes being totally eliminated by a ballot issue as soon as next fall.
Correct. They're definitely afraid of that issue. But the last piece that I think also was important to note from what Senator Blessing said was, he goes, I don't think we give local school districts and school boards enough credit for how they manage their funds. Because, he talked about, there's these cash balances. We've already heard from ODU, the Department of Education and Workforce, that a record number of schools are already heading down the fiscal cliff of fiscal watch, fiscal emergency. There's a massive number heading there, and it's going to continue to get worse, especially as they've come off the ESSER cliff. So school districts built those cash balances, which we talked about before. That cliff is here, and they're struggling to figure out what the next step is. And their only option, because the state's not kicking in their fair share, is to ask the voters for more money, which throughout the state, this last election cycle in November just now was very positive for public schools. But again, I think the point here is that you now have local residents that are making sacrifices for their public schools, which means they value their public schools, which we know.
Right.
But why isn't the state doing more? They're going to just continue to try to lower the income tax, and you've talked about the three legs of funding, and this is where we are.
Awesome. Number 4. What's
Number four? Last one, overriding your vote. So this was more of the appeal to the governor, right? So he did veto this already. It allows an appointed group of officials, the budget commissions, to reduce funding that you voted for if they decided that the school doesn't need it. So if the community votes to give the schools...
Who doesn't decide if the school needs it?
Well, the county budget commission gets to decide.
And who are they?
Well, they're a group of officials who believe that they know more of what's best in the local communities.
Oh, okay.
And so they know whether you have too much money or you don't.
Okay.
So there's some budget commissions out there that are apparently that much in the weeds. They're looking at your forecast. They're looking at all of your monthly reports. I'm sure they're pulling all those, right, every month.
Yeah, so last month we met with a new finance committee here for the district, and we had CPAs, we had attorneys, we had accountants, and those professionals who are very successful look at us and go, we know nothing about school finance. So now we're going to ask some other officials who have zero experience in school finance and how we operate and how we run. They're going to decide if we have too much money or not.
That is currently what they have the ability to do.
Okay.
So I don't know how they're going to manage to do that, but that's happening. Again, that example is the community votes to give the schools $100 for education. It allows a small group of officials to say, nope, you only need $90. That's all you're going to get, effectively canceling out your vote, and it takes the power away from the voters, and it gives it to a board that does not run our schools.
Again, I just want to make sure we make this point. We just don't assess levies on property owners in Bryceville, Broadview Heights. We just don't go, you know what, we're going to take 5.9 mil levy and you don't get to vote on it. You're just going to pay us that money.
Right.
We put an initiative on the ballot so that individuals with their own freedom and rights get to go vote yes or no. And they're going to vote yes or no, okay? And if it passes and we start collecting that money a year or two later, this budget commission could come in and say, no, you don't need that money.
Correct.
That's
so this
fascinating.
and part of this already was starting to happen in Geauga County, where they were trying to strong arm certain people, where a school voluntarily took a reduction because they were trying to explain their cash balances. It's why we've also gone through the campus master planning process to have some of these long-term goals on our books that we've discussed at the board level for that reason of things we haven't had to necessarily do in the past. But as you've talked about before, the levy cycle is you're going to carry those cash balances. You're going to increase those cash balances to a certain point before you have to deficit spend,
right?
Which is the cycle that we're in, which is why we're starting to, plan for the future as we go now.
And we use those cash balances to the benefit of the district. We have those cash balances that we invest,
correct,
and earn investment income from. And that, again, allows us to extend that levy cycle. So we're not going back to our community year in and year out. In this community, we've had a history of 10 years or more before going back and asking for additional revenue outside of bonds or special projects like buildings. But that's just interesting. I guess my frustration that I'm starting to build here listening to you explain this is they're painting public schools with a broad stroke, right? Maybe there is a district or has been a district or a superintendent or treasurer who maybe have done things that weren't right, or maybe they were able to get a levy through that they didn't need. I can't imagine that, but maybe there is. Well, let's deal with those individual districts, not public education as a whole.
Correct.
And that's what this legislation is. It's painting us with a broad stroke. It's making the public schools seem like the bad guy in all of this. And we're just playing by the rules that they've given us to play by.
Yeah, and I mean, it just, you have all these different loopholes, different laws. How do you really plan? That's really the biggest problem that we're going to be facing is how do you plan when there are now so many variables potentially ingrained in law and all these different ways to circumvent the process at the local level. How are we supposed to do our jobs and plan appropriately?
Yep.
And when you look at a levy, districts don't immediately pass a levy sometimes. There are some districts and communities that struggle to pass a levy that need 2 or 3 cycles to do that and to communicate their message. That's also what that cash balance is for as well, because you may have to stretch your dollars longer until you can get that message across that it truly is needed in the community. So it makes it very unstable, which is again why we've continued to ask the legislature to fund it fairly and pay their fair share, which would give districts more stability and local communities more stability, and it would give the property tax relief that people want.
Yep. All right.
Anyway.
We need to take a quick break. I think we need our blood pressure to come down a little bit. I think we got a little too heated, maybe a little bias with that. So let's take a quick break, because when we come back, again, we have 2 special guests coming to us from BBHHS as part of our administrative team that I'm so excited for everybody to hear from and gain some insight. So we'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Well, welcome back. As promised, we have 2 special guests with us today, 2 of our outstanding administrators, 2 of 3 in particular at the high school. Mrs. Izo is not with us today, so we want to make sure we give her a shout out. Not that we're leaving her out, but rumor has it she may or may not have made a trip south with the marching band. Is that correct, Mr. Jacob?
Yeah, she was down in Disneyland with our marching band all of last week, and they had a great time, and our kids had some really unique experiences, outside of performing just on Main Street. So it was a great trip.
Yes, it's awesome stuff, and what people don't realize is our building administrators also do other things outside of the normal day. And sometimes we as community members take that for granted, seeing them at games or at plays or at musicals or orchestra, band, all the way down to Disney World as Mrs. Izo went. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. I'm going to cut straight to the chase and say we have two of our administrators, Mr. Kevin Jakub, high school principal at BBH, and Mr. Josh Backo, assistant principal at BBH. And I'm just going to start with this, guys. Do we have a bullying problem at the high school?
Yeah, we do. And I don't say that flippantly, because I truly believe if we have any student who comes into school at any point in time feeling uncomfortable, whether it's a documented case of bullying or something else, it's a problem. And as being a father of kids who have experienced similar social aggressions and situations, there is no worse feeling and no more helpless feeling than that as a parent. So do we have a pervasive problem, something that occurs on the daily for a wide variety of kids? No, we absolutely do not. But if we have one kid that's experiencing it, I consider that to be a problem.
Awesome, and that's great. And you pointed out you're a father as well, high school age children that I know of, and it is. We're also parents, so we feel it. And for our kids, we want them to feel safe at school. But I know as administrators, sometimes we read things on social media, or we have meetings where parents will say that kids are being bullied, and we're doing nothing about it as a school district.
You've seen that on Facebook?
Yeah.
What?
I try not to read that. I try not to see it, but people always share it with me for some reason. I don't know why.
I don't know why.
Right? So, but before we dig deeper into that, Mr. Jakub, maybe a little bit about yourself. How long have you been principal at BBHHS?
This is my 5th year as the principal at Brecksville Broadview Heights High School. Before that, I was a assistant principal at the high school for a couple of years. So I'm in my 7th or 8th year now. I kind of lost track.
They all run together.
Yeah, they all start to run together at a period of time. And so I've been here a pretty good long while now. And I'm very, very pleased to say this is really, truly the best staff and really the best communities, no offense to anywhere else, that I've ever had the great privilege of working with.
And you've had unique experience. You've not only been a high school principal, assistant principal, you've also been a middle school principal, right?
Yes, absolutely. I was a middle school assistant principal and a middle school head principal at a couple of different districts as well.
All right, so we'll tie that in maybe later on. But Mr. Backo, how about you?
Yeah, so this is it's crazy. It's my 4th year here at BBH and within the district, and it's already my 8th year in administration. So I've had the opportunity to work at some other great districts in Northeast Ohio as well. And just to add on to kind of what Mr. Jakub said too, as far as like a bullying problem and things like that, I think you kind of see that everywhere you go. And I think it's not unrealistic to think that, kids get in social situations, and there are times when kids are mean to each other. And, I think we do a great job at the high school of addressing those things. And we do it in a lot of different ways. So I'm kind of excited to talk about that today.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna start a little bit sooner, that as adults in our society, we do not set a great example for our kids. I mean, let's just look at Facebook. And we can look during election time, not election time, but we watch adults treat each other poorly, and then we expect our children to be better at it. So I think we as a society, as adults, could do a better job at setting an example for our students. And kind of that's what we want to focus on, because I get to see it every day. I talk to you guys a lot. I get to see the great work you do. I see how you educate kids after the situation that causes whatever it may cause, and the kids learn great lessons. And if we could just carry that out and reassure our community that, yes, indeed, we do something. So I'll start over a little bit. Phone rings. It's Mr. or Mrs. Smith. Mr. Backo, my son and or daughter is being bullied. I need your help. What happens?
Yeah, so the first thing we do is, I am open with them and I listen. Like, that's the biggest thing for us as Mrs. Izo, myself, Mr. Jakub, the counselor, whoever is going to take the phone call is going to listen first. And we want to know everything that the parent has to say, and we want them to be as specific as possible, because that really helps us address the problem. And that can be hard sometimes, because the parent isn't there firsthand when these experiences take place with their children. So, we do it. We have to ask a lot of questions, and we have to be good listeners.
Awesome. Mr. Jakub, how about you? I'm sure they approach you from time to time when they think Mr. Backo isn't listening, maybe.
Well, I think Mr. Backo touched on something. We have to do a lot of listening, but we also have to ask a lot of questions. And I think sometimes people get frustrated because we ask those questions not because we don't believe you, but because we're trying to find the nexus of the situation. We're trying to find the evidence to verify that the situation that you're telling us is existing is actually occurring. And we'll often get, well, you drilled my child. They're not the one who's done something wrong. And we're not at all drilling your child. We're trying to figure out when this started, who was involved, where it took place, who might have observed it taking place, so we can get all of that information so we can have a meaningful outcome for all of the parties involved.
Okay. So what does that look like beyond that initial phone call? So that parent calls, you gather information, you find out that the parent has very little to begin with usually, right? So what's the next step?
Well, I think our very first step is to get the student down who's experiencing the situation, whether it be a social conflict, a socially aggressive peer, or an actual case of bullying itself. We want to talk to that student. And a lot of times we'll get parents or even the student themselves, they say they want to remain anonymous. That really does limit our scope of how effective we can be, because you can imagine if we have to stay anonymous in all these situations and we end up trying to talk to the students who are not necessarily acting in the right manner. It's very hard to speak in generalities of, well, maybe I heard you might have been doing this. I can't tell you who it's with, but does this sound familiar? And as you can imagine, most of those kids are going to say no, because it's very, one, for them hard to recall if that actually took place. And then two, if they don't really have a context in which to frame it around, they don't have their own version of what took place to latch onto. So very first and foremost, we ask that we put the process on the table so we can shed light on it, because that's the most important thing for us to be able to do, and to speak in not in generalities but in realities.
How do you then balance the protecting that person who feels as though this aggressive behavior is coming upon them? Because that's got to be difficult, right? To get that information and want to do something about it, but at the same time you want to protect them. So.
Well, there's always a fear, I think, from people that if they say something, that there's going to be retaliation or further escalation of the situation. And in my experience, that's just not true. It actually is quite the opposite. Once it's called out and once it's addressed, we actually see significant decrease in that actual behavior, because everybody knows this is what's taken place and we've had an opportunity to address it. So what do we do is we really try to reassure the person that, I can't promise you that person's going to be nice to you. I don't have that magic wand. I really wish I did, because it would make my life a heck of a lot easier and my job a lot easier. I can't control how other people will respond, but I always tell parents and kids, we can control how we will respond. And if we have a student who is called out, for lack of a better word, or disciplined or put on notice for unfair treatment of a peer or unkind treatment of a peer, you can rest assured we're going to respond significantly if that behavior continues to take place after we've already addressed it.
Awesome. Mr. Backo, anything to add to that and your experiences?
Yeah, and I think one thing that's important to remember too, and like often in these situations, I like to say it's a two-way street too. And so when we talk to each of these individuals, like Mr. Jakub brings up like retaliation, right, and everything, and so I think it's important to understand the whole picture of the situation. So quite often when we talk to maybe the party that is perceived as like the bully in that situation, and we also talk to the other party that's perceived as a victim, we're kind of laying out ground rules for both, because I'm not just gonna just go to the bully and say, hey, I don't want to see A, B, and C happen too. I want to navigate with the victim or the other person in that situation. Okay, how can we navigate around this situation so this doesn't continue to be a problem, and how can you prevent maybe some of this by just where you sit in class or how you approach this student, kind of do some conflict management too.
Yeah, I think it's important that we oftentimes in this story gets lost is that we need to not necessarily always focus on the perpetrator, but the victim themselves. School is not the first place that you're going to find, or the last place you're going to find, social conflicts with peers or people that you know. You're going to have potential conflicts in relationships, which could be a domestic dating violence situation, which is similar, to our conversation here. You can have neighbors in the future who you don't see eye to eye with on property line disputes or Christmas decorations. And if you don't learn how to properly self-advocate and express yourself in a meaningful way at a younger age, all we're doing is kicking that can down for future problems. So we don't want to lose sight of the fact that the victim in this situation is really our primary focus, that we want to continue to work with and educate and help teach self-advocacy skills and resiliency too.
So what is it, do you think, that you find yourself communicating to both parents and the students involved in this situation? And what do you want them to hear from it? Because I know you deal with these situations day in and day out. And what is that one message you want to get across to them when they find themselves in a situation like this?
Yeah, well, one thing that I always like to start with too is I want to know what they want the outcome to be. And quite oftentimes when we talk about that with the victim or the parent, I would say 99% of the time, the outcome is, well, I just want this behavior from the other person to stop. And like Mr. Jacob said, we don't have like a magic wand, but it's that conflict resolution that we're really going to try to work towards. And so we kind of have to navigate around and make sure that there's a level of comfort with that, because quite often, the victim in this situation, that person, they're not going to necessarily want to go into a room and sit down with a counselor and myself and that other person and go through conflict resolution and management right away. Now, we're hoping, and when we talk to the parent, like maybe we can get to that point where we can do some of that. So we kind of try to set the table for how we can get to that outcome that the parent wants.
Yeah, and for me, I want there to be a belief that nothing doesn't happen. I think that's, it's kind of like that old wives' tale, like, oh, nothing, this person said something and nothing happened. Very rarely, if ever, is that actually the case? Because I will tell you, it might not be the outcome the person wanted or what they expected or what they thought it should be, but there were consequences, there were conversations, and most definitely something did happen. We live in a great community here. We have very supportive parents, and I can say very confidently that when we call home parents and let them know that their child may have been involved in something that wasn't the best representation of themselves or their family, they take it personally, and they don't like hearing what they hear, and they do want to hold their child accountable. So oftentimes that phone call home, while it is perceived as being nothing or light, it's actually the most important thing in solving the situation, is because when our families support our schools and they support the information we're telling them, we get positive results, not just in academics, but in behavior as well.
Yeah, and I'll steal a quote that you use a lot, and it kind of is part of the story. When people call the building and they talk to a teacher, school counselor, or administrator, 9 times out of 10, they leave as happy customers, right? Yeah, but when they don't contact with us and they don't communicate with us, or they don't let us know something's going on, they can become very frustrated and upset. But at the same time, we're dealing with 1,600 kids. We have to know what's going on, and we just need that two-way street of communication. For them not to be afraid, pick up the phone and call, because we're there to support them one way or the other.
Yeah, we want your calls. I always tell people at every freshman orientation we do, new student orientation, do not suffer in silence. If you don't give us an opportunity to respond, we won't be able to respond. And chances are the situation won't get better without our assistance.
And sometimes when people say the school does nothing, it's well, we did nothing because we didn't know anything was going on.
Yeah, I would say that happens most of the time when nothing is done.
Right.
Burning question
Okay.
that I have. Speaking of communication.
I'm very excited about this question, Mr. Yannick.
How much does bullying cost?
How much does bullying cost? No, but seriously, do you have any insights? I know you guys have made some adaptations to the cell phone policy. Do you feel like any of those changes have resulted in any improvements in terms of bullying, cyberbullying over the past year or so, or what may be coming down the road? Just because, like, none of us, I think maybe not, hopefully not you either, we didn't grow up with Facebook and Snapchat and all of these different ways to communicate, electronically through their phones. So I guess that's my question to you guys is, how do you feel like, has any of that made any positive changes that you guys have seen with the cell phone piece of it?
I think it has. I think the hard thing is like that a lot of times when you see things that are like maybe potentially cyberbullying or people being mean online or over social media to somebody else, a lot of times that happens when a student, outside of school, or when they do have access to their phones and stuff like that. And we still try to navigate around. If a parent calls us and says, hey, this situation is happening outside of school, and it does start bleeding over into the school day and affecting, another student, like, we bring those students in, we address that, and we try to move forward with that situation, because that is, if it's affecting somebody's school day, we want to make sure we put guidelines and parameters in place so that student feels supported and safe within our walls.
Yeah, I don't have any quantitative evidence that tells me that it's reduced anything, but qualitatively, I think it does. And I think what it does, as opposed to reducing the amount of incidents, it reduces the scene around it, if you will. That when something big happens, it doesn't spread like wildfire instantaneously during the school day when kids are in class. So it really slows down, I think, the spread of information, which maybe gives a little bit of reprieve and doesn't allow those situations to spiral into things that they're not. So overall, I definitely think there's an impact, but how to quantify that and look at it, I don't think I can do quite yet.
Yeah, no, I mean, because I think people, like, you see that where they have their cell phones, so they take video, they take other things that make it probably worse than when they have it versus they don't.
Yeah.
It's only been 6 years since I was a high school principal, and I just look at these guys and think, man, only 6 years ago, I didn't have to deal with some of the things that they had to deal with social media. It sounds like I'm an old timer, like it was 15 or 20 years ago. It was only 6 years ago. And just the new things that roll out year in and year out that our students are involved with that make the job of managing a building that much more difficult.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure we hit the education piece of this whole podcast. So guys, could you shed some light on what is bullying, and then also what is social conflict? You've used that term a couple of times, social conflict. So can you, just for the listeners, give a little bit of understanding of what bullying is, or harassment, social conflict, and what you see in the building?
Yeah, one of the things we probably should have started with and kind of talking about when we talk about bullying is, there is policy that our Board of Education has adopted along with administrative guidelines that we adhere to and follow very closely. And I think sometimes that's what maybe creates some dissatisfaction with people, is because the policy itself that is created, and this is not to blame the Board of Education in any shape or form. So
No, because every school district I work in has the same policy.
has the same one.
pretty much the same.
But the reality is the policy is very poignant and very prescriptive and outlined as to what constitutes bullying and what our actions need to be when it is bullying.
Because there's a legal definition.
There is
of
a legal
bullying.
definition of it. And I think one of the things that really is hard for people to understand is bullying is not necessarily a one-time isolated incident or a two-time occurrence. It is something that is pervasive. It is ongoing. And I think the one that is really hard to pin down and understand is that there is an imbalance of power in that relationship, where it is a gang of students or a student that has significant more clout using that influence to alienate and to cause harm to the student in a bullying situation.
That already sounds terrible, right? And horrible. So, and that's what you're doing all that investigative work for, right?
Yes.
To try to determine if it hits those 3 items. Okay, so if it does hit those 3 items, what's next?
Yeah, so we last year actually we came together to make sure that we were all in alignment. The intermediate school, the middle school, and the high school administrators all came together, and we sat down and kind of reviewed and realigned like our forms and kind of created like we do. If you ask a middle school principal or a high school principal, sometimes 80% of our day is filling out like statement forms sometimes with students and stuff like that, right? So it's really important that we get things right and kind of go through things. And so we always kind of start with almost like a checklist or a procedure. And on our new statement forms that we kind of developed last year as a team, what we did was we put specific questions on there. And so one of those questions, Mr. Jakub talked about it being persistent and targeted, right? And so one of the questions that we put on there is this the first time that this has happened with this particular student or group of students? And I will say that 90% of the time we get the answer of yes, this is like this one time. And so I think it's important to like educate the students on, again, what our policy is and what is bullying. And then if it is like the first time, we start to lean kind of heavily into that conflict resolution or conflict management aspect of it. And that could be utilizing our school counselors, who are awesome in that situation. It could be utilizing our behavioral coach. All those resources that we have available to us, we kind of lean hard into it. If it does on our checklist, if this isn't a first time, or this appears to be targeted, if there appears to be that imbalance of power, we actually go on to kind of a secondary form that we work with. I'm fortunate enough to have Mrs. Iza with me as a team up at the high school, and so we work together and kind of go through a checklist of questions of what's happening in each situation. And if it does lean into and meeting that criteria, that board criteria that we have for bullying, then we actually go in and go ahead and make a report on that gets sent to the parents, and then we can go ahead and enact consequences if needed too.
Okay. So then if it doesn't meet all those things, what are some things and tools you do with that social conflict that you see has been successful, and are probably things that parents don't even know about that we're actually doing?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, and I really hope that it always ends that way or moves towards that peer resolution between the two parties. And so we, again, have to make sure that the victim and the person who might be perceived as the bully in this case are open to some type of peer mediation in there. But we work closely with that student's school counselor, and then sometimes if they do work with the behavioral coach or the behavioral coach is available to be involved too, we work with both of them. But we ask that those students are comfortable first, and then we kind of all sit down together. And I always tell them that it's not I'm not asking anybody to go into this room and make apologies or anything like that right off the get, but to basically have a conversation of how they feel in that situation, or what made them feel hurt, upset, in that way. And I know that sounds kind of like really elementary, but it's just part of growing up in that social context and learning that process. Like Mr. Jakub talked about, peer resolution and kind of working, like they're going to have to do that stuff as they get older, as they, go to college and they have maybe a roommate in college and have to manage situations where they don't agree on things, or, when they're getting their first job and they have to deal with a coworker that they don't see eye to eye with. And so all of those things kind of take place in there. It's a skill. We're teaching a skill. And so that's what I kind of like about that.
We also crystallize that, Mr. Harrison. We don't just have the conversation with no teeth behind it.
Right.
There are forms that exist in our process, and I have to give Mr. Backo, Mr. Warders, who's no longer with us, he's at Aurora now, and
we won't mention him.
We won't mention him. We forgot about him. And Miss McCulley, they did a great job of coming together and building a process that is very articulate and available to all of our families, and posted on our website, and even posted in a form that's known as student-friendly language. So we have the legal forms, and Mr. Backo took the time to break it down so it could be put into kid-friendly language, so it's really understandable and accessible for all involved. But once they do that meeting, they go through a process where they typically do a cease and desist order or a no contact agreement, where the parties will mutually agree to stay away from one another. And that's a great piece of evidence for us and a foundational building block, because if either party starts to violate that agreement, now we're talking about a situation, well, if you told me you wanted to keep Johnny away from you, but you keep going and sitting at Johnny's lunch table, that's really hard for me to understand. And is this really a bullying situation if you're the one who's seeking out the interaction? Or in the worst case scenario, if Johnny continues to go find you at your lunch table and make comments and threaten you, well, now we're starting to see evidence of bullying taking place because it's occurring with the repetitive action.
We have something to act upon.
And we have something.
And I think that's one. I worked with you guys last year in a situation that was one of those situations that was really like, this is really leaning towards a bullying or harassment type of situation. But then we come to find out that there's a no contact order between two students that we thought had been working pretty well for weeks on end.
Yeah.
But then there's a conflict one day, and we find out they've been sitting at the same lunch table together, even though they had a no contact. So that's what makes it so difficult for you guys. And that's the credit I want to give to you guys. When you're dealing with situations like this, you put some of these things in place, but then the students, by their own choosing, well, on this day we're good. Yeah, he's not a bully, he's my friend again. And it's so back and forth, but that's what we deal with, right? In high schools,
absolutely.
Middle schools, it's our job to educate students.
There's a lot of development going on,
Correct.
Right? And learning. And
Correct.
so it's hard.
They get to make mistakes at this age, but I think the moral of the story is we're here to protect kids. We want them to be comfortable. We want them to want to come to school. And I think this would be an appropriate time to talk a little bit about some resources that are out there for parents and for our students. We have the Safe Schools Hotline, right?
Yeah.
Maybe explain a little bit what the Safe Schools Hotline is, especially for those people who say, well, I wanted to say something, but I'm afraid it was going to be held against me. So what is the Safe Schools Hotline?
Yeah, and so Mr. Jakub does a great job with his newsletters, his high school news and notes that he sends out every week. And
Chapters worth.
Yes.
Outstanding
He
information.
doesn't leave anything out.
They're a little
that's for
long.
sure.
They are a little long.
No, we always joke about that, but it's a compliment. It's when I hear a high school parent say, well, I didn't know about that, I'm thinking, how did you not know about that?
Yeah.
I've read it 5 times this month.
But I mean, the great thing about them too is that, like, if even if you don't read it all, like, he highlights everybody in there, and that goes to you, and kudos to you for the fantastic job you've done with building school culture here since I've been here. I think it's been awesome, but you don't leave anybody out, and I think that's part of the reason why it is so long, so everybody can find what they're looking for in there that celebrates what we are and who we are at BBHHS. So, but at the bottom of that, if you get through all of that, at the very bottom, there is our Safe Schools helpline or tip reporting line. And any parent can go on there. There's a link there too, and it goes to like an email, and you can actually report. It goes through the state, but it'll trigger an alert to myself, Mr. Jakub, and our administrative team, and then we're able to follow up on that. And you do not have to in that with that Safe Schools reporting helpline. You do not have to make it known who is making that report or put down your name. It can be done anonymously. However, I will say this: it is very, very helpful if we know who the source is that is reporting it, so that we can follow up and ask questions.
More details, because there's never enough detail.
Yeah, I think far too many times, like, it's just, people who fill that out, they do a great job, and there's a lot of, it kind of leads you through questions on there about what you might be reporting. But at the same time, like, if it's hard, it's like, no parent usually is like trained to make reports on this kind of stuff, or nobody's sitting there as a detective or anything usually. Right. I mean, some parents are, but it's difficult. So, like, the more we can kind of get involved, if you do put down your name and your contact information, then we can reach out to you. Or if a student does that, it's very helpful. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. I think we have far more success with the ones when we do have somebody to talk to, because we're not just going into this blind and having to talk to only the bully in this instance, or instead of the victim or the person who's reporting this and how they feel.
So, well, guys, I can't thank you enough for your time. We've only touched on the very surface of this and this problem that all schools face, society faces. So I just want to stress to those listeners out there that want to know more or have a concern or have a question, just pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and have a conversation with your son or daughter's teacher, their principal, whatnot, because I think when we have those open lines of communication, we can solve a lot of problems early and often. But let's leave it with this. I'm going to ask you guys one question here. What is the best thing about Brecksville Broadview Heights High School in your mind? As assistant principal, what's the best thing about the high school?
One word: the people.
The people.
The people.
And win with people. I think a famous football coach said that one time.
Right? Yeah. But it's the kids, it's the teachers, it's the staff, the custodians, everybody involved, the administration, the counselors. It's hands down the people.
So you stole Mr. Jacobs because he's famous for that. So he's going to have to come up with something different.
I'm going to echo it. I'm not going to come up with something different because I wouldn't be being truthful. We have exceptional kids that walk through our door every single day who will blow your mind with the things that they can come up with and how intelligent and mature and innovative they are. And to support that, we have unbelievable teaching staff who creates opportunity for kids and tries not to box them in and to help them grow. And I think Mr. Backo even touched on it. You talk about the people that you don't always necessarily think about what makes a school great. Our head custodian, Mr. Lupan, makes that building shine, and he takes it personally, and his crew takes it personally if it's not clean and safe or warm, and they want it to be an environment for kids to learn. And we just have the best people that walk through the front doors at our building every single day, and it makes it a special place to be.
As I've always said, this place isn't normal. And I mean that in the most complimentary way. We have special people, you win with people, and it's across the board. Well, Craig, I think we bring episode 5 to a close. Anything you want to end on? How about any feedback maybe on the podcast you may have heard from time to time? We haven't shared any feedback today.
The feedback is that I think people love it.
Oh, yeah?
But
Why do you think that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. We get people that want to come up to us at different conferences that want to talk about our podcast, and we have no idea who they are.
Right. Yeah.
So we're like, oh, that's great that you're watching it. But it is kind of gaining some traction. I think this is a great way that we can share this authentic story. Mm-hmm. But I have a question for you.
Yes.
Have you heard from Sudsy?
Sudsy, I do. I hear from Sudsy often. He's become a friend. I can confirm it is a he. As I told you before, I thought it was just a screen name, but no, it's a he. He's a community member of another school district who has been tuning in, listening to our podcast, and provides both positive feedback and some constructive criticism.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, but not about me.
No, it's all he commented about how you seem to be pretty intelligent. I thought
I
need to
like
listen
Sudsy
a little bit more. But he has been harassing me to this point about the word use of authentic. In the first episode,
he sounds like a bully.
I said,
oh,
I might have to have my mom call and start a bullying report on this. I could be bullied. He didn't like my word choice, and it felt as though we were using authentic too much.
Okay.
So I said, well, we're going to have to find a different word choice. So yeah.
ChatGPT, synonyms for
usually after every episode that we post, I usually within about 45 to 47 minutes, that's how long it takes him to get through it, he usually sends some feedback our way. So I'm looking forward maybe to catching up with this individual in the future and seeing if he has any other feedback for us.
Okay. I like
But
it.
with that, thank you guys, Kevin, Josh. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking on this topic with us, and more importantly, thank you for what you do for our students and staff. You guys do a great job at the high school. So with that, we'll see you in a couple weeks for our next episode.
Yeah, sounds good.